Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives podcast, where we talk about what really happens in schools, the healing, the harm, and the hope. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Amber, the voice behind the social media handle at Beautifully Organized Chaos. Amber is a passionate advocate for trauma-informed education, using her online platforms to challenge toxic systems, support struggling teachers, and reimagine what safe, inclusive classrooms can really look like. Her story is as raw as it is inspiring, and one that our educators interested in trauma should really hear about. So Amber, welcome to the show. Thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So Amber, in your social media handle, Beautifully Organized Chaos, you talk about some of your own experiences as an educator. So first of all, tell us your journey as a teacher. What grades did you teach? What did your classroom look like? And what got you into the field to begin with?
So I have been a classroom teacher in a public education setting for about 14 years now. And I was a third grader when I knew I was going to be a classroom teacher. I had a teacher who brought learning alive, and we went on many field trips. We went to her sheep barn and watched lambs being born. As a third grade student, I mean, just the things that you're not going to see in a typical public school education. And she was phenomenal. Absolutely adored her. So I was hooked at third grade, and every decision I made from then on in school, it was geared towards eventually becoming an educator. My classroom was one of inclusivity. In college, I took some classes about autism and autism spectrum and reaching those students, and it absolutely took my learning to another level. I ended up with a bachelor's in early childhood education, a bachelor's in elementary education, both with autism emphasis, and a paraprofessional certificate with autism. I could reach the most minds, and I could understand how to best bring myself to a student with autism and bring them with us along the journey in the classroom. I wanted to make sure that everybody who stepped foot in my classroom knew that they were loved, protected, and that they had the same opportunity to learn as everyone else.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. And I know that your students absolutely respected and adored you as their educator for making them feel like that they belong. What was the moment that you realized that something in the system needed to change for yourself and for others based upon the state of how classrooms look today?
Yeah, so in January of 2022, I was teaching fourth grade, and I had a 10-year-old student bring a gun into my classroom. Now, I never laid my eyes on this gun. I have no idea what this gun looked like. I have no idea what caliber. I have no idea if it was real. I have no information on that at all. But the parents felt stirred enough that they called the principal and said, "Hey, we cannot find his gun at home. Please go check his backpack. We think that he might have brought it to school." Fantastic on the parents. The fact that he has a gun, not so great, but they were cognizant enough to be like, "We can't find it at home. We think he might have it with him. It's very important that you go check his backpack." So my principal it was around noon, came into my classroom, took the student and his backpack out of my classroom and left. This was on a Wednesday, and he never returned. I didn't look into it. This was a very troublesome child. So I figured whatever he did, he was still down in the office. He was still with the principal. The principal knew where he was. My hands were clean. I was not worried about him. After school that day, I got called to the principal's office, and he pulled me into his office and let me know, "Hey, you've had a gun in your classroom for 3 days. This is what happened. This is who the child was targeting. And we sent him home. By the way, he's going to be back tomorrow because nothing actually happened. There's nothing in our handbook saying that he couldn't bring a weapon to school as long as nothing happened. No harm, no foul. And I said, no. Unfortunately, at that very moment in time, that was Wednesday. On Thursday, I was testing for COVID still. It was a part of our process every week. And I tested positive for COVID. So I had to sit. I absolutely just had to sit. Thankfully, there were so many students who tested positive for COVID in my classroom that same day that they ended up shutting my classroom down because I had no way of keeping my students safe. I had no way of keeping the person he was targeting safe. And I had no way of keeping others in the building safe. I had nothing. I had no information. I was out of class for 5 whole days. So the following Thursday, I went back into my classroom. I went back to the principal's office and I said, okay, here's the thing. I'm not safe. My kids are not safe. We do not know what's coming. And so I need you to contact the person he's targeting. I need you to contact their parents and let them know, hey, this is what happened. Your child is not safe. They need an alternative way to go home because they both walked home in the same direction. That student is not safe if they were to continue walking home after school. I need the child who brought a gun into my classroom. I need them to be removed from my classroom. I do not feel safe in that classroom. I need the police involved because I need to know that he is not a danger to himself or others, and he needs to be seen to make sure, like in a counseling or psychology session, that he is no longer a threat to himself or others. And like the school, the other teachers at the school, they all need to be aware of this. This isn't something that can just be left alone. My principal did not appreciate my boldness. He did not want to do what I had requested. And I said, okay, well, it's either you do all of these things or here is my letter of resignation. Mind you, this was January. We were midway through the year. And so he begrudgingly did all of those things, but he told me to sweep it under the rug. His exact words, they are burned into my brain, sweep it under the rug. And I chose not to. And any number of things could have happened. I am not okay with that. I chose to make waves. I did not sit quietly, and I was in a very hostile environment from January to May. I did still turn in my letter of resignation, and with that came passive aggressive marks and being snubbed in the hallway. There was no conversation at the end of the school year. There was no acknowledgement at like the end of the year assembly saying, hey, good luck on your next adventure, nothing like that. All of the other teachers who were leaving the building that year received some sort of recognition at the end of the year assembly. I did not. It was a very dark time for me, but I advocated for myself and I advocated for my students and I advocated for the whole school. I did not want, what was going to end up happening is if this student transferred schools, transferred districts, there was nothing in his permanent file saying this had happened and it would not have followed him. Nobody would have known. And I made a big enough wave that he has something in his permanent file. So there is acknowledgement of something that had happened and there might be a pause in his next school because if he's doing this at 10, what's he going to be doing at 16? So no, I made waves and I ended up getting myself blacklisted from teaching in the state that I lived in at the time. And it was very ugly, but I did what I needed to do to feel like I protected everyone I could.
Thank you for all that you shared. And you had me thinking in terms of just the fact as to how our profession works. It bothers me that we tend to see decisions that are made on a matrix-based judgment. And on that same pathway, we have a profession where the educator becomes that sacrificial lamb, if you will, in order to try and protect our students, because there seems to be a lack of wanting everybody to act in the best interests. It's more about protecting the image than protecting the students. So thank you again for sharing that from your own perspective and how that also came to unfold. So knowing that part of your story, and of course, all of our different educators out there who are listening who may have had something similar where they had those wonderful elementary school teachers and they had been fantasizing that perfect career, start to finish. I always thought that when I retire, I'd have like a whole Mr. Holland's Opus performance where I would have 30 years of students on a stage in front of me singing an anthem, and there would be thousands and thousands. There won't be. There certainly will not be. And for educators who are trying to resonate with navigating burnout and trauma, even if they haven't experienced it yet, what advice would you have for new teachers entering the field who are still pretty wide-eyed about it and don't even know what survival mode looks like?
Oh, survival mode is rough. I always ask some very deep questions when I meet a pre-service educator in the wild. What brought you into the profession, and what are your expectations of your first 5 years? I do not know, personally, I do not know of many teachers who are making it to the 5-year mark anymore. There are fabulous educators out there, and there are fabulous districts and classrooms, administration, all of those things. There's just not enough of them. What I would say to a brand new baby teacher, make sure you have a support system. Make sure your support system is physically in front of you, not just your sister or your best friend on call. Make sure your support system is on speed dial and that you can absolutely get away from the classroom on your time off. It is so important for your mental health to separate your work life from your personal life. If you are contracted from 7:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon, whatever your contract hours is, make sure, absolute sure, that those are the only hours that you are giving to your classroom. Because if you bring work home, you are working for free. And you are taking time away from yourself, you're taking time away from your family, you are taking time away from your rest. By doing so, you are going to burn yourself out so quickly. And you are not doing yourself service. You are just giving yourself freely to a classroom that you'll never be able to receive back.
Is easily dispensable too, at that matter.
Absolutely. There's some memes out there saying your job description is going to be on Indeed before your obituary is published in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And there's so much truth to that. You are completely replaceable in your classroom. You are not replaceable in your personal life. If you have children at home, if you have family at home, you are absolutely irreplaceable in those moments, in those memories. And you're not in your work life. Gosh, what I needed in my first 5 years of teaching, I needed to not spend my money in my classroom. It is not your job to fund your classroom. So I needed somebody to give me a budget and say, hey, this is what you have. This is what you should be spending. This is what you need to be spending. You have $250 that you can write off on your taxes per year on education expenses. So if you go above that, you are giving freely and you're not going to be receiving it back. I also would have advocated for myself to have a counselor or a therapist, somebody who I could get feedback from. These are the things happening in my classroom. Yes, I had a classroom mentor, but I don't feel like it was the same because they're getting paid from the district to tell me all of the bubbly, fun, perfect, utopian things, not the realistic things. So, brand new baby teachers, make sure you have a support system. Make sure that you have personal time and you're not giving away freely to your classroom or your district. Make sure you have a counselor or a therapist, somebody who you can talk to about the things happening in your classroom, even within confidentiality, because there is a lot. as an educator, you have to have a very confidential veil for a counselor. You are working within confidentiality, so that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, make sure that you are taking time every single day, every weekend to absolutely get away from your classroom. You will not get that time back.
Definitely. Some of the things that I've noticed that have really helped new educators succeed are just having a really supportive leadership, and I call it the fire department. If the house is ever on fire, you want to know that you have a fire department that will really back it up and protect it.
Mhm.
And the leadership is among those who can really make that happen. So great leadership, supportive colleagues. And when we talk about mentors, I feel like mentors should be sought out. They shouldn't be assigned. In my first year of teaching, I was assigned a mentor, and I was pretty much mentored or guided by being told everything I was doing wrong. I was never once told what I should fix, but I was just told, this is what you're doing wrong. Now figure it out.
So
That
what
wasn't
I'm
a
hearing
mentor.
is you were in front of the fire hydrant, just
Yes,
drinking,
exactly.
not
Exactly.
actually told, hey, this is what's happening and this is how we're going to navigate you through fixing it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's just like the leaking hydrant while the fire is still in full blaze, not
Yeah.
knowing how to plug in the hose. So mentors should be ones that we seek out as the mentee. They shouldn't be given to us because that's not a relationship that can always work out. And then if it can be done, which is not always the case, but really just trying to get good students. And in the case that you have students that really burn you out, I know the classroom culture issues can be really extreme at times. I had a lot of behavioral issues in my classes as well. Then at least having the leadership and the mentors to support the choices you make to get the best out of the students should at least be available to you, because if all of those factors are not present, that is on the road to click burnout.
Yeah.
So in thinking about what that looks like, your link tree includes a lot of resources on trauma support and even suicide intervention, which I'm so glad you brought that up in your own classroom experiences as well, because it's a crisis that we've seen in our students who are a danger, like you said, a danger to themselves or to others. And even educators who are on the road to burnout can use that training for just understanding their own emotions as well. So why is it so crucial for educators to understand these tools, and other specific points or resources from your link tree that we can start looking at today?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there are a lot of teachers who hit that burnout, and suicide is the route that they take. I've known 3 educators in 14 years, which on the grand scheme of things is not a lot, but in very small rural communities that I've always been a part of, that's a lot. I'm positive there were things happening in personal life that were trickling into their professional life. There are teachers who are opting for completion of suicide. There are students who are opting for completion of suicide. So I feel there's not a moment to talk about it. There might not be the resource needed for it. In my link tree on any of my social media platforms, again, it's beautifully organized chaos. I do have some suicide prevention links. I also have some classes pinned it's called the Assist program.
Suicide intervention skills training.
Thank you. It's classes that you can take to help spot some things happening in students, adults, where you can intervene and just say, hey, I see you. Your reasoning is valid. And that is so important, to validate emotions and validate experiences. And so the Assist program helps with all of those things. It helps you as a layperson, educators, to be able to come in, intervene, and just say, hey, I see you, and I'm going to get you the help that I can. It gives you resources. It gives you things like that. Within my link tree as well, I have links to resources, and I'm working to get links in all 50 states for resources for educators, resources for students, and resources for parents. Now, these resources are mental health resources. These resources are classroom interventions and things like that, where you can go to find information. If you are in the thick of it in a classroom and you are absolutely swimming just to keep your head above water, the last thing you need to do is to Google, what can I do to help my classroom? Where can I go to help my classroom? And so having a resource tree where educators can just log in and be like, I need help with this specific thing, they can find that link. And again, I'm just starting this. It's been less than probably 3 or 4 months. So it is not complete yet, but I'm working towards it.
And we're recording this segment in May 2025 for those looking for a little bit of a time gap there. And we'll have that link tree available in our show notes for today. So when we hear the segment in times to come, we can see its evolution and how it's grown since then.
Thank you.
So Amber, is there anything that we haven't mentioned today in our conversation that we wanted to talk a little bit more about based upon you and your story and what our listeners can be inspired from and benefit from?
Yeah. So when things happen, traumatic things happen in your life, you have a moment, a chapter of your life where the pages are not written and you have what is called post-traumatic growth. Lean into it. If you have something traumatic happen in your life, in your classroom, in your job, walking down the street, you have epiphany moments in your brain, in your psyche, and you are open to a world of possibilities because you might not have had it tomorrow. Absolutely lean into it. Lean into it in a structured setting, if you will. For me, it took 2 years. Along with the traumatic event happening in my classroom, I also lost my brother to a completed suicide, and I almost lost a foster daughter to a attempted suicide, all within a month and a half time frame. To say my mental health was not well is the understatement of the century. It took me 2 years to come out of that fog where I was just starting, I stepped away from the classroom. My life changed. My expectation of my future changed. And I blew with the wind. And I said, I know what's coming next, but I'm terrified to voice it out into the world. I'm terrified to speak it into existence. And I started making one small step every single day towards that growth that I was going for. At this point, we are 3 years out. At this point, I am in my graduate program for clinical mental health counseling. My goal with my counseling licensure is to help create the curriculum for pre-service educators and administrators to see and implement things into their classrooms for mental health awareness for students and for faculty, staff. Within that post-traumatic growth, there is a lot of things that can happen, and there's a lot of things that become very clear. And I tell you, absolutely lean into it. Your life, your experience is important, and leaning into it will change. It will change your next chapter, and having a next chapter is the most important thing.
And I have another question I wanted to ask as well, now that I'm listening to your story a little bit deeper as well. So 3 months before I also began my first year of teaching, I began teaching in August 2018. And in May 2018, 7 years ago last week, I lost a very close friend to suicide. And this is like the one person who was like a really good friend in high school, and I didn't have many, trust me, who would say to me, oh, you'll still teach, you'll change the world, everyone's going to love you, you'll be a great writer one day. So I got my PhD kind of in his memory. And
Congratulations, by the
thank
way.
you. And first of all, my condolences on the behalf of your brother. And my question to you is, based upon your research as well as your lived experiences, how can those seeking their post-traumatic growth in the aftermath of another person's completed suicide take place?
Oh, like I said, mine was a 2 year long muddle through the thickest mental just minefield. There were days that I could not get out of bed. There were days where I was a puddle of soup on my bedroom floor. Grief looked pretty ugly, but I knew that I had something to say. I knew that there was going to be something positive that came out of the biggest grief you could ever have. And I put myself into counseling. And I'm not trying to like shove therapy down people's throats, but there's something so important about unleashing what you have on the inside. A therapist's job is not to give you advice. And I think that's a lot of people's conception of, hey, how are you doing? Here's my advice. Here's your homework. Do this before our next session. And that's really not what therapy is. Therapy is meant to verbalize what's happening on the inside of your brain and then help you navigate your emotions through it, help you navigate your expectations, help you navigate what you've experienced, and help you get to a point of understanding and acceptance and growth from whatever in your life is taking you to therapy. So I have two things. One of them is going to be a trigger warning, and I'll talk about that second. Again, make sure you have a support system. If you are going through the grief, if you are going through somebody around you, close to you, part of your life has completed suicide, make sure you have a support system in place. I would also say one of the biggest things that I did for myself was I took control of my health, and not in a diet crazy, whatever. I went for walks without my technology. I completely distanced myself from my phone and I reconnected with nature, the sounds, the smells, foot to pavement. And that does a lot of good for your mental health, whether you're ready for it or not. But definitely make sure you have a support system. It's really important to get all of those negative thoughts and even intentions out of your brain because stewing on them moves you into dangerous territory. Getting them out, speaking them, and I'm not saying create a vlog or anything like that. There's premeditation in some things like that, but make sure that you are speaking to somebody that you trust about the way that the suicide has impacted you and harmed you and what you're going to do in their honor, in their memory to make it have meaning for you. The second thing I was going to touch on, and I'm so sorry, trigger warning with this. I don't know what that looks like for a podcast, but my brother's death by suicide was very, very hard. The second hardest suicide that affected me personally was an 8-year-old student. It was March of 2020 when the world shut down due to COVID. And a student in the school that I was teaching at that year, an 8-year-old student committed suicide because her safe haven was school and nobody knew. Her place of refuge was school. Where they received food regularly was school, and nobody knew. That was one of the most difficult things. I had received a phone call from the school and said, hey, I need you to go check in on this teacher. With no warning whatsoever of what was happening, I went to a fellow educator's house and I said, hey, I'm just checking in on you. And she was a mess. I had no idea what had happened. She had to explain to me what had happened. And I was distraught for her, and she was distraught. She had stated in her, I think she had already retired from teaching and had come back. So in her 30 years of education, that was the hardest thing she ever had to do, was go and speak at this little girl's funeral. If you see something, say something. I cannot give enough validation to that. If you see something, say something, because nowhere in, I mean, this little girl was 8, and I think about that, my daughter is 7, almost 8, so she was second grade. The child had been through kindergarten first and partially through her second grade year, and nobody knew that she was being abused at home, that she was not being fed at home, but there had to have been somebody who knew. Whether it was a relative that had come to the house and saw something, whether it was other friends, and I'm not saying that the 8-year-old girl's friends needed to step out and be like, yeah, this is happening at so-and-so's house. That's not what I'm saying. But if other parents saw something, they needed to say something. Be brave enough to be the villain in somebody else's story. absolutely be brave enough to call somebody out on their bullshit. Be brave enough to be the villain by calling CPS, by alerting somebody, because there was nobody that stepped in and said, she's not being fed. There's nobody that stepped in and said, I think she's in a dangerous situation. And at 8 years old, took her own life because she couldn't fathom going another day without her safe haven of school. And it's not okay.
I really appreciate that validation of being the villain in someone's story, because it echoes the sentiment of, if as an educator, if you are going to fail by trying to overcome the atrocities of the system, at least fail with some level of grace and knowing that you made that attempt to save it for somebody.
Absolutely. I threw my career away. I threw my career away to make sure that my 24 students could walk into their classroom safely, and I would do it again tomorrow.
What would you say is the secret sauce to education?
I think that's a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
Quality educators are so important. Quality education is so important, but I feel like the students that we are receiving in 2025 are not the students that we went to school to teach how many ever years ago.
In 2019, yeah.
Yeah, I graduated in 2012, and I went in just gung-ho, I'm going to change the world. And no, these children are going to change me. I feel like the students that we have today are not the caliber of students that we anticipate. I say expectations a lot because as a person who has very high expectations of others, my expectations were constantly not being met. But it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately. The children that we need are being raised by competent and emotionally safe parents. And in a lot of cases, I'm not saying all, but in a lot of cases, parents are not home because they can no longer afford to live their life on a single income. And that is just the nature of the beast in today's day. So students are being raised, children are being raised by tablets, by television, and by others. And I'm not saying all, this is not a blanket statement, but the caliber of students that we are receiving in education is lacking in a lot of areas. So what is the secret sauce? Presence. Being present with your children is a secret sauce for emotionally intelligent students. And I personally, I am in grad school. I work full-time and I'm in grad school full-time, and I am not able to be there a significant amount of time with my children. But when I am with my children, I am not on my cell phone. I am not just sitting in front of a TV. I am making sure that my children's emotional needs are met. I am making sure that my children have a safe place to come. And I feel like there would be a lot of positive movement forward if there was an ability for the emotional intelligence of adults raising emotional intelligent humans.
Amber, thank you so much today for your honesty, your courage, and the way that you hold space for others in this work. Your words today haven't just been reminders, they've also served to become rallying cries for change in how we treat teachers, students, and ourselves when, as you hint at, being present for emotionally intelligent students. And for those of you listening today, be sure to check out Amber's work at the handle @BeautifullyOrganizedChaos. And remember, you don't have to choose between caring deeply and surviving the system. There is a way forward. Stay grounded, stay human, and we'll see you next time on the Classroom Narratives podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing in Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, Together, we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.